What's going on, guys? Welcome to another episode of Healthspan Academy. I'm your host, Craig Shearhart, and with me today is my special guest, Mr. John Welbourn.
Hey.
He's a huge mogul in the fitness world. He started off with a bachelor from University of California, Berkeley, where he played varsity football. Went on to complete a master's in education from University of California, and then played 9 years in the NFL with the Eagles, Chiefs, and Patriots. And since then, he's kind of shifted into strength and conditioning world. He served as CEO of Well Food for 6 years and then founded CrossFit Football, which became Power Athlete in 2009. So today is all about how John helps get people freakishly strong and fit and healthy. John, thanks so much for being here, man.
Cool. Thanks for having me.
So I want to kick this off with athletics growing up. I assume you went on to pro athletics. Was that something that was kind of pushed on you as a kid? Was it just like genetics? You just kind of decided to go that road at some point? Was there a turning point? What was that like kind of growing up?
Man, I really wish there was some really cool, elegant story about how I dreamt about being a professional football player my whole life. And, like my entire life was dedicated towards this, idea of training for, human performance, but it wasn't. I really had no aspirations to play professional football.
Interesting.
When I was pretty young, I got into, obviously I played baseball, I played basketball. And I grew up in Southern California, so I went to the beach a ton. I surfed, I was in junior lifeguards. I mean, all the things that a kid does. I played soccer. Cool. And I got into fighting, got into martial arts pretty early on, about 6 years old.
Oh,
my
wow.
older brother got beat up by like some local bully. And, like all kids in the 80s, when you get beat up by the bully, what do? You go to the dojo. So my dad wasn't much of a fighter, took my brother down to this, Japanese Shotokan martial arts deal and dropped him off. And about 3 weeks after, he came home and started beating up on my other brother and I. My dad just took all three of us. So I got into martial arts really early.
Yeah.
And the instructor was like this Japanese dude. It was like hard wooden floors. He used to people would get tossed on these hardwoods. You had to kneel a bunch. We got beat with this like bamboo bokken stick.
Oh,
and
wow.
I remember I came home one day and I was like, Mom, the sensei like hits us with a stick. And she's like, yeah, it's karate. Like you've seen, when you guys watch Kung Fu theater on Sundays and they beat the shit out of those guys. So I just figured that was normal.
Yeah.
I did that for about 4 years. And then when I was about 10 years old, I thought kicking was stupid. And it was mainly because we were watching a ton of boxing. So my dad was a big boxing fan.
Yeah.
And we watched, Sugar Ray Leonard, Marvin Hagler, Roberto Duran,
Wow.
all of these fights that were going on. And I was addicted. And I had this dream. I was like, you know what? These guys aren't martial artists. They're boxers. And I want to be a boxer.
Yeah.
So about 10 years old, I decided kicking was stupid. I want to get into boxing. The problem was the only boxing program was down at the Y down in San Pedro, and I grew up in Torrance, Palos Verdes area.
Yeah.
So I found a kickboxing academy that had boxing, that I could ride my bike to. So I would ride my bike to this John Barrett Kickboxing Academy, and I got into doing that and really enjoyed the boxing aspect and like the jumping rope and dude, we were like Rocky fans. So, like Rocky 3, Rocky 4, like that was like, foundational stuff.
Yeah.
So I had visions in my head, like I would like to be a professional boxer. And when I got to high school, I did some stand up with a guy named Nono Labonsier, who was a French dude who ended up getting brought in by the Gracie family to teach them to do stand up. And his son's an MMA fighter. And I think his daughter is like one of the top jiu-jitsu players in the world.
That's wild.
So I would go train with Nono. And ended up getting into, being exposed to a whole bunch of different stuff. But I remember about that time we were we were boxing, we were fighting, mm-hmm. and I ended up kind of getting in the ring with a dude who was a little bit older than me. And I remember he hit me pretty good, opened up right underneath my cheek. Yikes. And took a big hit. And I remember thinking like, I'm going to go play football. And it's like my older brothers all played football. And they told me all the cool guys played football. They both went on and played college football Division III. So I, wanted to go play football, mainly because, I didn't want to be uncool. But the thing that I was most attracted to was the lifting weights aspect. And this stems from like years before. I remember I was probably about that time I got into boxing.
Yeah.
We did something. There's something in Southern California. I don't know where you're from.
Toronto-ish.
Okay, Toronto.
Yeah.
So I grew up in Southern California, like right near the beach, and there's a program called Junior Lifeguards. Yeah. And it's like it starts at about 10 years old, and it's a lifeguard prep program.
Right.
where you go in and, we would just go to the beach, and you would surf and you would run and swim, and you basically did all the lifeguard stuff. And the idea was that you start at 10 and you go through like 2 years of C's and 2 years of B's, and you go to the A's. And then at the end, you're like 16, 17, you take your lifeguard test. Mm-hmm. So we did that, and it was like first aid, and it's like the coolest program on the planet. Yeah. Like the one sad thing that when we moved to Texas from California, like one thing that was like my biggest reservation was that my kids wouldn't get a chance to do junior lifeguard, because I learned like CPR, I learned first aid. Yeah. I learned how to like, swim in the ocean, even though we did that as kids, but like surfing and just like being super comfortable. Yeah. Like anywhere we go, like we took our kids to Costa Rica, about a month ago. And like, we're out there and I'm surfing, body surfing big waves. And the kids are like, I was like, dude, this is all we did as kids. So long story short, we're at the aid station, or at the lifeguard station, doing CPR, and we see like basically what we thought was a riot. It was just a whole bunch of people kind of yelling and like moving, and we were like, this shit. Wow. So we all kind of get up and we went over to where the boardwalk was, like the Strand. Yeah. And there was people like kind of partying, and like we heard like just commotion, and all of a sudden it came into light what was causing the commotion. It was a dude walking. And this guy was just walking, and people were treating it like an Avenger was like on the deal. Wow. And this guy walked by us, and he was probably about 6'5", about like 300 pounds. Yeah. Wearing shorts, string tank top. The dude's chest was so big, it looked like you could sit a beer can on it. And he was walking, and like, he was so physically impressive that like people were fucking losing their minds. Like I had never seen anybody that big. I'd never seen anybody look like that. He looked like a superhero. Wow. And so we followed him, and then he proceeded to run up and down. There was like a big kind of a ramp, like big concrete ramp. Yeah. Maybe 100 yards. And he just started sprinting up and down, and we watched this dude, and we were like, I don't know what that guy is, but that guy looks like a superhuman. And his name was, he's since passed away, but he was a pretty famous football player, a guy named Lyle Alcedo, who played defensive tackle for the Raiders, if you guys want to look him up. Yeah. Yeah. He just looked like a mutant. And I remember thinking that day, like, I like to be big and strong like that. Yeah. And I was kind of skinny at the time. Yeah. And so there was like a lot of weird things. Like I wanted to lift weights. I wanted to be big and strong. Mm-hmm. And so there was all these kind of like other pieces. And the one thing I knew about football was that you got to lift weights. And I knew that all the people that hung out in the weight room and lifted weights were all big and strong. Yeah. And so there was like this kind of like, maybe they just get big through osmosis. They just are around the weights and get big. I didn't know what you had to do with them. I just knew that there was big, strong people around those weights, and I wanted to be big and strong. So those were like kind of the two things that allowed me to go play football. And one, I wanted to lift weights, and two, playing football felt like fighting against people that didn't know how to fight. And that allowed me to go in and play and be pretty good. And, like things like, jumping rope, handwork, footwork, speed, all these other deals that I developed in the fighting, training, paid huge dividends for sure. Going and playing football. Yeah. So, I started playing football when I was 14, freshman high school. By the time I was a sophomore or junior, I think I had like 100 scholarship offers, and ended up, looking at a whole bunch of schools. But the selection for me came down really to the education aspect. Mm-hmm. And the reason being was I never really had any aspirations to play pro football. Huh. One, I had never really known anybody that played. I mean, we saw Lyle Alcedo, and we saw some professional football players. Right. My Pee Wee basketball coach was a guy named Art Shell, who's in the Hall of Fame, who lived in our neighborhood. Yeah. So like I had seen this a little bit, but I didn't ever see any white dudes. So I just didn't really think like, a white middle-class kid from Palos Verdes was going to necessarily go play in the NFL. That's wild. My dad was super sharp. My dad graduated high school when he was like 16. Oh, wow. Graduated college at like 19, graduated law school, working full-time at like 22, and was a, practicing trial attorney, and one of the smarter people I've ever met in my life. That's wild. And so education was always at the forefront. Yeah. So I remember when I was looking at all these schools, where are you going to go? The best degree I could hang on my wall who would give me a full scholarship was UC Berkeley. So that's kind of where I ended up. Amazing. The football thing ended up panning out pretty well. I never went to school thinking, I'm going to go play in the NFL, like Tony Gonzalez, who was in the Hall of Fame. Yeah. He and I came in the same year. Tony was there 3 years, went on and got drafted by the Chiefs. Yeah. He was there more as like a springboard to get to the NFL.
Yeah.
I just figured like, I'm getting a free education and I'm exchanging playing football for it. So my goal is to graduate and try to get as many degrees as I can and set myself up for the next evolution, which I never got to hand in my thesis. That's a whole other fucking discussion on. So I went to, I graduated with a BA in rhetoric, which is like an English philosophy argumentative approach deal which is really pre-law. Yeah. And then then in my 5th year, I had to get in a master's program that was a 1 year. Yeah. So I applied for this education and ended up doing well and was basically supposed to hand in my thesis a few years later after I played the NFL, because the thesis had to do with why players leave early and why they don't value their education when they go to professional sports.
Oh, interesting.
So the whole premise would only work if I actually got the chance to go play in the NFL and wrote it.
Right.
And so what happened was
were they flexible on the deadlines? Were they like hunting you down? Sorry, man.
No,
I'm in the pro ball.
They were totally flexible. And then my advisor, the professor who's in charge of the program, ended up passing away suddenly.
Oh, really? Oh, wow.
And then the guys who came in to take over for him basically were like, no, you've been out for 3 years.
Really?
And I'm like, dude, I have this written. Like, this is all the emails and everything. And they basically blew me off. Wow. And I never got a chance to hand in my thesis. And so I never got my master's, which was kind of a big thorn.
Oh, that's brutal.
Yeah, but
that's absolutely wild. I guess things worked out okay otherwise, but that's wild to me.
Yeah. There was also another issue, I think. I don't know if you've read Coddling of the American Mind.
I have not. No.
You should definitely check it out. It's a real interesting book. It gets into like the whole, where we saw this kind of switch in education. And now all of a sudden, when I was raised, it was sticks and stones might break my bones, but names will never hurt me. Yeah. And now all of a sudden words are weapons, and because they cause stress and stress is damage, now all of a sudden words are weapons. Yeah. So there's a really interesting book that shows the evolution and why this changed. And when people are like, what's wrong with this generation? It really goes into great detail in this Coddling of the American Mind. I saw that firsthand in that I want to say, man, maybe my 4th or 5th year. So while I was working, no, it was actually a little bit earlier than that. Somewhere in my 3rd or 4th year, I got invited to come back and sit at a round table at the Berkeley School of Education and just answer questions about this. And I had a lady kind of jump on me a little bit, just kind of, it was pretty argumentative about some of the things I said. And I kind of not dismissed her, but I did, where I was like, hey, here's the deal. I was a student. Yeah. I sat where you sat. Now I play in the NFL, and I can give you definitive answers on why this is. And the problem was my answers did not fit within the paradigm in which they were looking.
Sure.
And I left there thinking like, man, I probably didn't handle that as well as I should, because I just dismissed her. And then when my professor passed away and my deal was like, hey, can I hand this in? And they were like, no. I was like, man, felt like if I had navigated that other situation a little bit better, they might have let me hand it in. But then again, I've never done well with myself where I've curbed my ideas and my thoughts based on what others want. I feel like, in this world, people are going to like you, some are going to hate you. Yeah. The one thing I don't want to be is unauthentic or unoriginal. For sure.
Yeah, 100%. So that education piece, do you find that kind of guided you through coaching? Did it kind of complement the stuff you're doing, or how did the coaching piece come together for you?
Kind of another accident. I obviously got hurt. So I ended up with, 9 accredited years. And then in my 10th year, I went to go play for the Patriots, and I got hurt in the last preseason game.
Oh man.
Ended up not saying anything, and then kind of getting into a weird deal where they had to make a roster move. I got cut, and then they went to re-sign me, and I couldn't pass the physical. And so all of a sudden I came home and had surgery. Oh shit. So before that, I went to go play for the Patriots. I was living in Newport Beach, and I was driving to Carson every day, which is up in Athletes Performance was there. Now they're Exos. Yeah. It's a pretty long drive if you guys know Orange County to LA. And I just got tired of doing the drive. So I started going up there a few days, and then I would train. I had like a little gym in my garage, but then I started training at a CrossFit gym because they had a bunch of bumper plates.
Yeah.
Somewhere around that time at the CrossFit gym, the owner ended up reaching out to CrossFit HQ. It's like, hey, I got this professional athlete training here. And somewhere at some point they're like, hey, do you want to come do this thing called the CrossFit Games? And so about a week before, at first I was like, no. And then they hit me up about it again. And I was like, yeah, what is it, working out? Well, I'll go fucking crush these people. So the week before I went to training camp, I went up and I did the CrossFit Games.
Yeah.
Came home.
That was the first one, right? 2007?
Second one.
Okay.
So 2008, they ended up making a movie about it called Every Second Counts, which I think is still on Netflix.
Yeah, that's wild.
And then a week later, I went to training camp for the Patriots. And I always think that maybe like the load and all the training might have contributed to injury, but hindsight's 2020.
Yeah.
So when I came home and had surgery, I got a phone call from Greg Glassman, who was CEO of CrossFit and founder at the time.
Yeah.
And asked me if I would come help them develop their technology on how to train athletes. And it was the first time I'd ever had anybody discuss training in terms of a technology. I always thought kind of training was more about, said principle, more about stress, recovery. I mean, I looked at it more in terms of like crafting an organism more than technology in terms of like, it just was a really interesting, and the way I said it was exactly the way he said it. So for me, it's kind of a interesting thing in that it kind of sparked my brain and thought, is training a technology? And more importantly, what is my technology? I know what CrossFit is, but what's my tech?
Right.
And so I said, yeah, and ended up CrossFit Football ended up launching about a month later. Yeah. And it was my interpretation of how to train athletes using the principles of CrossFit and translated into I guess you could say like a vernacular or just a lexicon. I mean, whatever you want to call it. Yeah. For CrossFitters to understand how to do strength training, but it was based on an entirely different set of principles. CrossFit, increased work capacity, broad time modal domains, constantly varied, it was based on my own principles of training, but translated so that market could understand. Right.
That's wild. Very cool. We actually used to run CrossFit football classes at my gym.
Nice.
The guy that I opened the gym with took your course and was like blown away. They were super popular. Yeah.
Well, it was wild to me. I knew, because it's what I'd done since I was 14 years old. I mean, my entire life. And so it was amazing when CrossFit reached out to me. My first question is like, do people want to know this stuff? Like, I just kind of thought it was a discipline for people that were and this is another weird thing. Let me see if I can preface this in a different way. Being a professional athlete, especially playing the NFL, you live in a really weird bubble. It's a very tiny bubble where all your friends are professional athletes. You hang out with other professional athletes. So you kind of think the whole world's a professional athlete. Right. But that there's other people out there. And I just thought they went to the fucking gym and did like lat pull downs and Busu ball bullshit and did a spin class. Like, I didn't know that there were actually people that were training. I thought people just were like doing organized fuck around. Right. Yeah. And so what was wild was when I met the CrossFit community, I was like, wow, these are normal, non-professional athletes that are taking their training very, very seriously. Yeah. And I was like, I wouldn't have been more surprised if my head popped off. Just because I all my friends are playing the NFL. We go on trips. I train at a facility with other professional athletes. I just didn't have access to, civilians or just non-normal, normal, what I would consider normal people. Yeah. So my first question to CrossFit was one, do people want to know this? And two, is there a market for it? Yeah. And their comment was dude, I think there's a whole bunch of people that want to know this stuff. And then when I looked at one of the first questions they asked me was do you think CrossFit is an athletic form style of training? And based upon my lens and the way I viewed training, I said, no, it's not.
Interesting.
So, the fundamentals of athletics and especially movement, one, sagittal, frontal, transverse plane. So you have different planes of motion. You step squat, there's all these different movements. When we looked at the CrossFit stuff, it was all sagittal plane, bilateral hip hinging. Yeah. Yeah. So if you're trying to train athletes to move 360 degrees, different planes of motion, step, squat, lunge, jump, run, your training has to be at least representative of the demands of what you can place your athletes in. For sure. Yeah. And when I broke their stuff down, I was like, it's all sagittal plane bilateral hip hinging, but that makes sense because of it. But, Greg Glassman, injured leg with polio, was a gymnast. If you look at gymnastics, it's all, obviously there is a lot of rotation, but people fail at the margins of their experience. And this is what his experience was. Yeah. So the training reflects his own experience. Yeah. And so a lot of times when you see people's training, or at least the people push out training, it's very personal to who they are because they're looking at it through their lens. Right. something I wanted to do very different is I wanted to develop a blueprint for athleticism the way I understood it. There was a book I read years ago called Deep Nutrition. And we had a lady on our podcast, Power Athlete Radio, recently. And
I think I have a copy of that somewhere.
Yeah, it's fucking excellent.
Yeah.
I think everybody should read it. But in there, she makes reference to something called the Marquette, or I think it's Marquois mask. And Marquois was a plastic surgeon who became with this, was fascinated by the idea of beauty and symmetry. And what he did is, based off of the Fibonacci sequence, he created this thing called the Marquois mask, where he could lay this plotted mask on top of a face and then figure out where people were deficient and then make those corrections and then make somebody more beautiful based off of the idea of symmetry. Because we know what beauty is. Yeah. Like we can all sit in a room and somebody better looking than the norm walks in and everybody will look and know within. Now, they might not be your taste, they might not be your type, but there's no denying that person's pretty or good looking or better looking than others. For sure. Just like I'm not necessarily a big Ferrari fan, but if a front engine V12 Ferrari pulls up, it's going to fucking snap my head around because the sound, the movement, the way the aesthetics, all the other stuff is done in such a way that it's based on symmetry.
Just like the Jack dude walking down the beach.
Yeah. He looked like a superhero. And I mean, there's a reason that when they draw, superhero characters, they look like He-Man, or, you see Chris Evans or Chris Helmsworth, or those dudes. I mean, they look like superheroes. Yeah. Yeah. So this Marquois mask was based on this idea of symmetry, and they could lay it on top and then basically make adjustments. Because here's the deal. I'm sure you see people that have plastic surgery and you look and you're like, shit's fucked up. Yeah. Like something went off the rail. But his whole deal was that you want to make people better looking where you don't know what was done. We just know that it was subtle and the person's better looking than they were before, opposed from holy shit, what did you do? And this happens to us. Yeah. So I read that book years ago. Yeah. And I became obsessed with this idea of there had to be a blueprint for athleticism. And athleticism is really hard to quantify. Yeah. But what's unmistakable is when you see somebody move through space and do something effortlessly and seamlessly, just like beauty, we know when we see it. Think about in basketball or football or whatever these sports we watch, or gymnastics, for example, in the Olympics. When you see somebody do something that takes your breath away, there's something within us that knows that that's athletic, the pinnacle of athleticism. Yeah, you're just drawn to it. Yeah. So I went back and defined it: the ability to seamlessly and effortlessly combine primal movement patterns through space to accomplish a known or novel task. And then took those movements with what we call primal movements, and not primal like the Liver King, but more primal because these are the first ones you live. You do. And then figured that if I could figure out the components of athleticism within these primal movement patterns, and I can increase your proficiency, and then do something, which is the chunking model, which I learned from education, letters become words become sentences, sentences become paragraphs deal. And then use this term that we developed called athletic problem solving. Now, by putting these things, by teaching the parts, putting it together in different ways, and then forcing people to find new ways of doing things, you can increase athleticism. And based upon my definition and the lens and the blueprint that we discuss with athleticism, you can analyze other programs to see whether or not they're proficient or deficient. Right. And so when CrossFit approached me, my deal was you guys are confusing work capacity with athleticism. You can you're confusing effort for intensity. I mean, there's just a lot of things that you've done. And it's because those guys didn't come from a classical strength conditioning background. But they ended up becoming the most, successful fitness, franchise or whatever you call it, like licensee or whatever. I mean, it's, CrossFit's done more for putting barbells in people's hands and getting people introduced to weightlifting than anybody else on the planet has ever done. Yeah. So, I mean, it for all the negativity and the jokes and the South Park and all that, you can't deny, the influence and the tidal wave that CrossFit has created. So, I tip my hat to them for that. Yeah, for sure. And it is kind of ever evolving. You're you mentioned the multiple planes. And I think the nice thing is that as affiliate owner, you have pretty much free domain to kind of program however you see fit. So we add some rotation stuff and stuff like that. But before CrossFit football, there was no horizontal pull. And there was also no rotation. Yeah, you're right. So, and then also with CrossFit football, we started programming multiple workouts of strength and a conditioning workout. That was actually the piece that Glassman told me I virally infected and destroyed the CrossFit community by teaching people they needed to be strong and fit.
Yeah.
So CrossFit football has a very interesting distinction in that we completely altered the programming and the approach that people took to CrossFit by realizing that being strong made everything better. And then also programming multiple workouts in a day, which they hadn't done. You just come in and do one WOD. Now every gym you go into has a strength WOD, conditioning, movement, sprint, whatever it is. So we looked at, which is really what we did as professional athletes. You'd always go out, do your agility, your technique, your position stuff, your sprint work, your conditioning, and then go lift weights.
Yeah. Absolutely love that. So I want to dissect some of the core principles in strength. And it's kind of like I've picked up a lot of stuff just kind of indirectly from your work over the years. And one of the things that stuck out to me is, and I didn't hear this quote directly from you. I think it came from Barbell Shrugged. And the principle is that it all works, all the modalities, all the rep schemes, no matter what you're pushing or pressing, you're just basically moving heavy things against resistance over time, X amount of sets. Has your opinion of that changed in the last 10 years? Do you think there's an upper limit to this? Does that depend on the athlete, or is there how do we use that principle to sort of limit or expand our limits when we're thinking about programming?
So the quote ends up being everything works, but not everything works forever, and not everything works optimally.
Right.
So because something works doesn't mean that that's the best thing to do.
Right.
And I think the issue comes down to, I'll just give you an example. I had a guy hit me up and he's like, I've been doing this great strength program. I think it was in reference to, what was it? What was the squat every day? Boris Shiko was,
I don't remember what it's called. I don't remember what you're talking about.
Yeah, it's but it was basically like a Russian squat program where you squat every day. Yeah, and it's it'll come to me in a second.
Yeah.
And this guy's like, this is the best thing. It's blown my squat up, and I put 20 pounds on my squat within X amount of time. And my problem is you're so physically drained that you can't train anything else.
Right.
And so I'm like, just because something works doesn't mean that it's optimal.
Yeah.
Like if your goal is, to get stronger, across the board, it feels like a really shitty thing. And you just, there just seems to be this idea that just because something works, you can say, hey, I did a bench program and I put 5 pounds on my bench in a year. Yeah, you did get stronger, but what did you leave behind? And more importantly, could you put 20 pounds on your bench if you had done something a little more intelligent?
Right.
So I think the issue comes down to, we're so conditioned for whether or not this works or doesn't work. And we don't necessarily look and say, just because something works, does it mean that it's optimal? Did it result in the effect I was looking for? And more importantly, am I trying to get the maximal return for the minimal investment?
Right.
And that's always been about the focus of my training has always been about economy of time and economy of movement.
Yeah. What's
the maximum return I can get for the minimal investment? If I gotta nuke my town every single day to build one building, it doesn't make sense. and that's how I think a lot of people approach training. They try to bomb themselves every single day, not realizing that, it's a continuous evolution and that you're looking to build on. Yeah. And the one good thing about doing this for a long time and having hundreds of thousands of data points is all of a sudden, if you look at it in the micro, it doesn't make a ton of sense. But when you take a step back, you realize that there's only a couple variables for performance and, more importantly, success. It comes down to the person that can train with the greatest relative intensity with the greatest consistency is the person that meets their goals. Yeah. Without question. Yeah. And that's been, with the CrossFit thing. And I'm sure you see people start coming 6 days a week and they're ramping it up and then they get hurt and it becomes unsustainable. Yeah. So my whole deal is the person that can train the longest at the highest relative intensity with the greatest consistency will be the person that'll meet their goal. And it just, think about it for dieting and nutrition. Yeah. If I can eat in caloric restriction longer with a high protein diet than another person, I'm going to end up being the leanest individual. Yeah.
I absolutely love that. So, and I think a lot of times if the athletes just got to sometimes go through that themselves, and I'm include myself in that. I think I bought a little bit into the higher volume is better and more is more. But then I remember at some point I did the Texas method. I don't know if you follow. So I did that over 12 weeks and everything blew up. I did less. It was just 3 times a week. And that's the strongest to this day. It's the strongest I've ever been. So it's about finding that kind of key dosage point, kind of like you alluded to, if anything is diminishing returns past the point, right? You kind of have to find that right volume that's going to get you ahead and not
at the right time. And here's another deal too. It really comes down to like training, like the life cycle of an athlete. So the training program that you do as a beginner is very different than the training program you do as an intermediate athlete and an advanced athlete. So all of a sudden you become like, okay, hey, I can use a kind of a mix of volume and intensity early on, and then I can use this volume in the middle. And then you get to a point where, you know, as you become more advanced, now all of a sudden things like intensity become more important due to things like inter and intermuscular coordination and rate coding and all these other D factors that as you train, you create greater concert, called symphony or whatnot, but your body works better. So now all of a sudden you get more out of less. So there becomes, and I think the reason that power athlete and CrossFit football has always done very well is that we're not just issuing like, okay, everybody do this. Like there's different stages and different positions that you have to hit and periodize through. And it's because we're looking at the evolution of an athlete over the life cycle of their training life.
Yeah. I love that. I've seen you post a little bit about high school athletes, and I think there's like, you mentioned that there's a lot of kind of myths and mistraining and stuff like that. And I think the age issue with training has kind of evolved over the years. It used to be never put a barbell on a kid's back or whatever. I think it's shifted a little bit over the years. Do you think there is an age cutoff for strength training? Like, is there an age of maturity where we should maybe kind of start looking at things, or what's your take on the?
I don't think it's ever too early. So for my kids, my daughters are 10, and we've started doing some strength training where I bring them in 1 or 2 days a week, and I've taught them to squat, and I've just taught them the basic movements, like especially with the Olympic movements, teaching them snatch and clean, and just taking them through light variations of that. The majority of their training up to this point has, I'm big on different planes of motion. So it's got to be rotational. So they do gymnastics. They got to do some stick and spin ball. They need to do something sliding. So they've learned to surf or ski and skate. And then the other big one is swimming. So different, orientations, especially within the water. My one daughter rides horses. My other daughter plays basketball and swims. My son does gymnastics. They're supposed to start next month. I wanted my daughters to be 10 before they got into jiu-jitsu and any of the fight stuff. So they'll start that this year. And I think the strength training, I don't think that there's a physiological reason to avoid strength training with kids, but mine more comes down to they're going to have their whole life to lift weights. I don't know if we got a race to get there. So, I mean, I've taught them stuff about 10 years old. I think once they get to high school, maybe about 13 or 14, maybe allow them to get more serious with it.
Right.
But if a kid is excited about lifting weights and wants to lift weights at a younger age, I think it really comes down to just aptitude and desire. So I don't think that you're going to stunt their growth or have, mixed up growth plates in this. Now, I think if the parent or the individual training is a fucking idiot and isn't doing age appropriate training, that's a huge issue.
For sure.
So basically teaching, bilateral hip hinging, which is squatting, stepping, lunging, pressing, push-ups, body weight pull-ups. I mean, things like that. I believe that should be taught universal to kids. Now, whether or not they want to start loading it up and trying to squat heavy, maybe I wouldn't mess with them until they're about 13 or 14. But it really comes down to aptitude and desire, and more importantly, what they're excited about. I found that whatever a kid's excited about, put gas on.
Yeah, absolutely love that. And I think kind of like you alluded to, it's a great foundation. And whether they follow through with that and start loading up the bar or whatever, it's like gymnastics, right? Those kind of fundamental moves, the squatting, depth, pulling, translates into sports. And if it's there, it's there. And I think as long as they've got the right coach in front of them, I think they're good to go. One of the other things you mentioned briefly was periodization, and you kind of, it sounds like you sort of have that built into your programs where they're sort of moving through the program, and then there's maybe milestones to hit. What is your general broad stroke kind of philosophy around periodization? You see some coaches that are like, we should never do this, all the way to like, we should absolutely periodize every 4 weeks. Do you try to get more info from the athlete to decide when those are happening?
So when I think periodization, I think of percentages. So like they're periodizing within, I mean, we use block periodization. If you're trying to talk about periodization in terms of like set rest, that's really, like I know Jim Wendler likes every 4 weeks, and I have coaches that do it every 6. I tend to do, based on the athletes, like we'll do a deload, or I hate the term deload. I like reload, like I'm putting more bullets in the gun.
Yeah.
Maybe every
Nice.
6 weeks, on the, like, if they train 6, I give them a 7th week off and allow for a little super compensation.
Yeah.
But I really think, so I never liked percentages, and I'll just give you an example why. When I went to college, I had a strength coach guy named Todd Rice, really good, excellent strength coach, taught me a ton of the fundamentals I still use today. The program we did was classic Olympic lifting, snatch, clean, and jerk, and like heavy push presses. We weren't really allowed to do much in terms of bench pressing, but it was all ton of overhead, snatch, clean, jerk, front squat. I don't think I back squatted for the entire time I was there.
Wow.
And it was just heavy front squats.
Yeah.
And a ton of plyometrics, ton of sprint. Like it was the right program for me at the right time, because I'd come from like a powerlifting background.
Yeah.
But the issue came down to, we would base everything off of classical periodization. Like, hey, we're going to test our 1RMs. And then for the next 12 weeks, we're going to lift in somewhere between, 78 and 84% for these, working sets. And then at the end of 12 weeks, we're going to retest. And I remember we were about 3 or 4 weeks in on the training program, and all of a sudden, like, the weights got real light. Like, I remember we were doing like doubles and triples at like, somewhere between 82, 84%. And all of a sudden, like, somewhere in there was like a couple weeks where I felt really strong and everything felt really light. And then all of a sudden, like week 6, and all of a sudden, like the dog days started coming. And I felt dramatically weaker in week 12 than I did in week 4 or 6.
Interesting.
And when we got to the end, we went to go max out, and I didn't put, maybe a few percentages on things. I gained a little bit of strength. And I remember thinking, like, shit, if I had maxed out in week 4 or 6, I would have smashed whatever I did. I felt way more beat up.
Yeah.
So I remember saying, like, the next time this comes around, I'm going to just fucking max out and see what I can do. And I ended up calling them gambler sets, where I was like, that you got to know when to hold them, know when to fold them.
Yeah.
The Kenny Rogers song.
Yeah.
And I remember when we went back through to do it again, same thing happened. All of a sudden, I'm warming up and I'm hitting my numbers, and everything looks really light. And I just started stacking on weights and ended up smashing a PR by, like, I think I clean and jerked 172.5 that day. Wow. Which I had never gotten close to. I mean, I'd power cleaned 180. But I'd never been able to really do like a full, like a full variation of the lift with a jerk. Wow. And I remember that day I went in and I was like, shit, man, like, today feels good. Yeah. So I really moved away from classical periodization in terms of percentage and got into something that I call inherent periodization, which is based more on the idea of rep maxes. So, hey, if I want you to work up to a heavy triple or a heavy double, we're going to kind of pyramid up to those heavy movements. And I'm going to base things more off of rep maxes. Yeah. And I'm going to base a lot of my training percentages off of what I either did that day or what I did that week. Right. So I didn't like the idea of, like, hey, I'm going to max out on day 1. And then I'm going to use that same working max for the next 3 months. I wanted to basically be able to test as often as I could within rep maxes. Yeah. So the entire CrossFit football program, and really my training, was based off of the idea of testing rep maxes. And then any of the training we did was based off of a percentage of said rep max. Right. So Chris Morris, who's at Kentucky, ended up, while he was doing his master's work, reached out to me because he'd been using CrossFit football. And we had a really fruitful discussion on this idea of like using rep maxes and basing it off of this. And he ended up writing his master's on something called fluid periodization, and came and gave an incredible talk on it that's based on this idea of daily matrix, and, not using classical periodization, but using rep maxes as a way to drive the training. Yeah. Because what I'm more interested in is, like, what's the heaviest reps you can lift on this given day? And, if every day is somewhat unique and you're able to work up to something heavy, then there's going to be some inherent periodization in there, because obviously you're not going to be able to lift as heavy on certain days as you do on others. Yeah. I love that. And I think the workaround, I think, at least when you're using that model, is that the 1RM is kind of like a shit show. Like, it's theoretically, you should be able to hit X reps based on your 1RM, but you don't really know. There's just athlete variability. Dude, there's way too much athlete variability, not only in training volume, nervous system efficiency, which has to do with hormone levels, but also with sex, whether or not you're a man or a woman. Right. Women will always be able to lift a higher percentage of her 1RM for more reps. we used to have girls come in and lift, 85, 90% for 10 or 12 reps, where I could never do that.
That's
and
absolutely
the
wild.
idea is it the fact that it comes down to, is it, if you can do 10 reps with 90% of your 1RM, is your 1RM truly correct?
Right.
Not really. It is for them.
Yeah.
But the reason comes down to is that to really lift an efficient 1RM, you have to have a highly adapted nervous system. And there's a direct relationship between testosterone and androgens and central nervous system efficiency.
Yeah.
That's why women can train at a higher percentage and a higher volume than we can.
Yeah. I think looking back in the history, I think there's definitely accuracy to that, even just my population of trained.
Oh yeah. But I mean, look at women's gymnastics.
Yeah.
Like the women's gymnastics, which is way more ground based. I mean, look at the amount of volume that those girls are able to handle for an extreme amount of time.
It's true.
Whereas the dudes end up fucking shattering into a million pieces with injuries just because it's such a high, it's just a really high motor demand.
Yeah. So true. So you mentioned injuries. I want to talk about, mobility / injury prevention. Do you have these pieces built into your programs generally? What are your recommendations for that? Do you have an X amount of time? People, is it kind of a feel it out situation?
Yeah, I mean, we do have programs like Iron Flex and some of the ones that we use. But for the most part, I feel like if this is interesting. I always thought that lifting weights was like stretching with weight on your back. If you're basically lifting weights with full range of motion movements, I believe that that's a ton of mobility work. I've never been a big I like some after, stretching after the fact.
Yeah.
Any of the mobility stuff that we do, like if something's tight, there's really a reason for it.
Mm-hmm.
And if you're going to mobilize something and, let's say your hip's tight and you want to mobilize it, you better go use it immediately or it becomes wasted. Yeah. So, I mean, my stuff has always been, and we ran into this a ton at the CrossFit football seminars, where a little is good. Too much makes fucking a shit show. And what we found was that people, Kelly Starrett has been a friend of mine for forever. Yeah. And, Kelly really took his supple leopard and they just went too far with it. And I think what we noticed was that people were hypermobile and they couldn't develop stability in the end ranges where we needed them because they had over mobilized. Yeah. So I remember we used to have people constantly come to the seminar and I'd tell them, I'd be like, dude, you've reached level 99. Stop fucking stretching. Yeah. Because you need a certain level of rigidity and tightness and like the ability to like create tension in those end ranges for protection. Yeah. If you're hypermobile in the bottom of the squat, you're going to fucking hurt yourself. Yeah. And so what we found is that people were just, like if a little's good, like a little mobility, I would rather have people err on the side of a little less mobility than a little more mobility. Mm-hmm. And I remember we were at a seminar in Australia and this dude, he was actually a pretty successful CrossFit Games guy. He literally stretched for 8 fucking hours at our seminar. And then we went to go do the squat and the dude couldn't maintain position in the bottom of the squat because his hips were just so loose.
Well, that's a shocker.
And and he was like, having all this hip pain. And I was like, dude, the only thing you just did, I mean, I know I'm not going to tell you exactly what I said to him because it was kind of vulgar and probably not, age appropriate. But I was like, yo, man, like the only thing you did was like, prepare to get banged missionary. Like that was like the only thing I could think of was like, dude, you are so flexible. Yeah. That under load, they're like, if you look at any Stu McGill stuff, the idea of like creating tension and, developing rigidity, and you need a level of stability in these end ranges to survive, to be able to lift heavy weights. Absolutely. Yeah, I fully agree. And I think like the definitions around mobility kind of get floated around, but I think of how mobile you are is how much like active range you have control. That passive range is where you run into trouble. And your gap between your passive range and your active range is that unstable piece. And I think maybe it's starting to get better. And I think like Kelly Starrett and Stu McGill have kind of waved a good path for that. Well, we years ago, when I was in Newport, we ended up trading out with some people that did yoga that wanted to start strength training. Yeah. And the thing that was amazing was that these people were all hypermobile in passive range of motion. The minute we put them under load, they couldn't squat anywhere near parallel. Yeah. And their squat ended up looking like literally like a dog shitting a razor blade, round back, shaking. Like it was awful. And I remember thinking like, dude, these people are like the most flexible people I've ever seen. Yeah. And that really started that kind of idea of like active versus passive range. I'm not like passive range of motion doesn't help me.
No.
Like, can you develop stability? And more importantly, can you actually get to these ranges while under load?
Yeah.
Because I mean, you think about it, like that's what sport is, right?
Yeah.
Can I maintain the stability under load in a dynamic situation?
Yeah. And especially because so many injuries happen at end range. Like if you've got no strength there, your ankle is going to roll a lot easier. Those little things that kind of add up. Yeah, I fully agree. Before we get going, I want to chat a little bit about the nutrition piece. I think like there's a lot of different schools of thought in terms of when we're thinking specifically about strength, calories and protein, probably the first two conversations we should talk about. The other thing is like high carb versus high fat, whether that should be your source of energy. When you start talking someone through nutrition or getting a plan together, or maybe talking to a friend through like nutrition or nutrition coaching or whatever, what do you put at the top of their priority list?
I always start with protein. I won't deal or work with an athlete that eats a low protein diet.
Yeah.
I mean, at the end of the day, if you can figure out the protein requirement, the carbs and fat is going to be based on taste and really what you're into. Mm-hmm. So I think, when you listen to people get into the macro debates, they're really focused on carbs versus fat because they can't walk back on protein. Like there isn't I would be very hesitant to ever work with an athlete that was like, you know what, I want to eat a low protein diet. I'm like, like once we figure out the protein needs,
good luck.
We kind of build, we build out all the other stuff. I mean, I've done high fat, I've done low carb, I've done high carb, I've done low fat. I find somewhere in the middle is pretty good. Unfortunately, there's people that with nutrition, like nutrition is like the new religion. And that there's people that are in these camps. I mean, and it's like they
take it pretty serious.
Dude, the wacky vegan people are as bad as the carnivore people.
It's true.
It's true. I mean, I did talk for the NSCA on metabolic flexibility, and you'll hear a lot of the paleo, people in the keto deal start talking about metabolic flexibility as their approach increases metabolic flexibility. And metabolic flexibility is defined as your body's ability to use different energy sources seamless and effortlessly, kind of like athleticism. So when you're in this aerobic, autonomic state, your body should be burning fat. When you all of a sudden flip it over, put your car in and you go train or you run or, whatever happens, your body should switch over and use glucose as a energy source.
Sure.
So like your body's ability to switch back between the two is what we know as metabolic flexibility. As I remember I first heard the term over 10 years ago. And I spent about 10 years researching this and trying to pull everything I can. And at the end of the 10 years, when I ended up doing the talk for the NSCA, the one thing that was very, very abundantly clear was there was really no mechanism to allow you to get to metabolic flexibility. Like you have to eat a keto diet to be metabolically flexible. You have to do this. The only defining factor that came down to the degree of metabolic flexibility was your relationship in muscle mass to body fat. The leaner you were, the more metabolically flexible you are. The more muscle you carried, the more metabolically flexible you are. There was no supporting information that was like, you have to use this to become metabolically flexible. It all came down to whatever you have to do to be jacked and lean. And the leanest dude is the most metabolically flexible. So if you ate a high protein, high carb, low fat diet and you got lean, because you were doing a ton of aerobic work and training and doing all this, and you were lean, you were metabolically flexible. If you ate a carnivore diet, now the one thing that's wild about it, and I'll walk this piece back, the greatest form of metabolic flexibility and the greatest form of health is the person that can eat the most diverse diet. So the most metabolically flexible people can eat the most diverse diet without issue. So if you naturally partition yourself by saying, I'm only going to eat red meat, then you're actually not proving and you're not using metabolic flexibility as it was intended.
Right.
So the people that can eat the most diverse diet, that can move between both carbs and fat, tend to be the most metabolically flexible. They also tend to be the people that carry the most muscle and the leanest. So if you want to be the healthiest, and it makes sense. I mean, think about fat's extremely oxidative.
Yeah.
Right. So you're going to have a ton of issues with just carrying excess body fat. Muscle is extremely insulin sensitive, and everything seems to work better when you carry muscle. If you look at actuary charts, the people that end up carrying their muscle the longest, that's why sarcopenia and, old people losing muscle is such a major issue, because when you start losing muscle, it's like, all of a sudden your actuary chart's like, you will die at this point.
Yeah. Not likely to get type 2 diabetes if you're a muscular person either.
No. And the one wild thing about type 2 diabetes is if you look at some pictures of people with type 2 diabetes, usually like it's let me see how I say this, like it's really fascinating because my son's type 1 diabetic, so we deal with this on a daily basis with him. And so the fact that type 2 diabetes is 100% fixable, you know, because it comes down to when you're type 1 diabetic, the beta cells no longer work. So something happens within, you know, the autoimmune system, and the body starts attacking beta cells. Beta cells regulate both insulin, which is really fascinating in that the body works two ways with insulin. It, like when fasting, the body kicks up insulin so that your blood sugar doesn't crash.
Yeah.
And then when you eat too much, it brings it down. So it's actually this like kind of like almost like cushion.
Yeah.
Well, for a diabetic, when the beta cells don't work, you almost have to give a long acting insulin like Levemir for fasting. But then you also have like they have Humalog, and they got other ones to manage the hubs. So looking to see the amount of like hitting a moving target that we deal with on a daily basis for my son, the fact that there's people that have made themselves type 2 diabetic by one, being overweight, eating a shitty diet, not exercising, doing all the things that they can, and then have effectively basically made themselves insulin insensitive, which means their body's still producing insulin. It just doesn't work.
Yeah.
And if they lose 20 pounds and get in shape, you know, type 2 diabetes goes away. But yet we don't have the medical community that's like, all right, we realize you have this problem. We need you to lose weight. And then you get into this like, oh, it's hormonal. It's this. No, like the law of thermodynamics have never changed. You know, I mean, like at the end of the day, if you consume more than you burn, now, whether or not, I don't give a shit about how you manage your, you know, basal metabolic rate or how many calories you think you burn. If you consume more, you don't lose weight. And like, I really wish it was hormonal. I really wish that, you know, Jason Funk's insulin paradox and this and all these other things were true, but it's not.
Yeah.
I mean, shit, dude, they've had people that have eaten in the caloric restriction, eating Twinkies every day and lose weight. So whenever I run into people like, oh, I can't lose weight, I'm like, dude, it's the fork's problem. Blame the fork. And they're like, no, I can't. And I'm like, okay. And I actually got into trouble on this one where I was like, I had a client and I was like, go Google Auschwitz and go Google like the Holocaust and all this. And, you know, the fact that there's actually a huge percentage of this generation doesn't believe that the Holocaust happened blows my fucking mind. Especially when there's like, you know, you can go visit Auschwitz.
That's news to me. That's absolutely
wild.
Wild.
You didn't know that millennials and a bunch of this current generation believe that the Nazi internment camps and all that is actually a hoax.
It's just like the moon landing, it never happened.
Like the moonlighting never. I mean, it's wow. Well, I'll just get you on that conspiracy with like the moon landing. How many people believe it's faked? Think about there was over 100 countries involved in that moon landing. And especially like with us going to space. Think about the tens of thousands of people that were involved in that. We can't keep a fucking secret.
No, there's no way.
There were 16 SEALs, right, that went and got bin Laden, and one dude writes a book. And he just happened to be the first dude that claimed it and wrote the book. I mean, we can't keep a fucking secret in this country. And you're telling me that for over 50 plus years with hundreds of countries and tens of thousands of people that nobody would have come out and written a book? Get the fuck out of here.
Yeah.
But
100%.
So I get a little pissed with the type 2 diabetes stuff because it's basically we're putting tape over, you know, the check engine light on a bigger issue. And it's like, you know what? Like you 100% did this to yourself. Now, did the food companies fuck you? 100%, because they made super highly palatable food that taps into your serotonin and makes you crave it. Just like when you walk into a Vegas casino and you see the lights and you hear all the machines going on, you want to gamble. Just like on social media, when you click on, you obsessively start clicking it. It's designed that way.
It's true.
I mean, like, have you ever sat down and eat, like, has one person ever eaten one Dorito? No, it's because Doritos are built in a lab so that you consume the entire bag. So we have created these hyper palatable foods that tap into all of our, you know, primal ancestry, and they've gone into this emotional thing and the crunch in this. I mean, so like, we're not necessarily equipped to deal with it. But being like, it's not my fault, like I have a hard time with that. And but like I said, to go back to metabolic flexibility, people that are extremely lean, that carry a lot of muscle, don't develop type 2 diabetes.
Yeah, 100%. This has been awesome, John. I appreciate it. So what's on tap for Power Athlete this year? Do you have new programs in development? What can people expect from the business?
Yeah, no, for Power Athlete, we do multiple things. One, obviously we coach people with training programs. So we're kind of, to consumer. So we actually provide training programs for people. You can find those at powerathletehq.com.
Yeah.
If you go to training site, we got different programs that fit different archetypes for athletes that we're working with. We do education through the academy. So we have an academy program where we actually bring people on the journey of educating them with this type of information and then allowing them to come test and then become our coaches.
Awesome.
We're launching out a big remote coaching deal where we've seen people make great progress in our training programs. But the next really evolution of this is bringing a coach into your training environment and then allowing somebody to take you on this journey. So we've been working on that. We do nutrition and we do a podcast as well, Power Athlete Radio. So we got some like 600 some episodes. So we've been doing it for a while. But, really the cool part is for me personally is coaching people and taking them on the journey, allowing people to do, provide them with information so they can go on and live a, healthy, strong, abled life. I think being able to give people the gift of performance, and more importantly, athleticism and strength and all these, traits and attributes and being able to, gift them those allows them to live a healthy and prosperous life for eternity. And I think that's been, a great piece that Power Athlete has done, and just being able to help kids get scholarships and help fathers and mothers train their kids effectively and hopefully extend this to the next generation.
Amazing. Absolutely love that. Before we go, I want to ask you a little bit about your personal health and fitness priorities these days. I think as a coach, it's easy to kind of get pulled 10 different ways. What is at the top of your list of your personal health and well-being, and what do your habits look like around that? So for me, so right now I'm testing a program, which is just a 3-day-a-week full body program that I ended up writing for a guy who does Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. Cool. So I've been doing that training. So it looks like basically it's, So, I've been doing that. It's really just an ABA, and then it kind of goes BA or BAB kind of a deal. Okay. So I've been doing that. And then so I do that 3 days a week. And then the other days I do just a ton of aerobic capacity stuff. So I've been testing this thing called Hypermax Oxygen. And what it is it's a machine that pumps pure oxygen into a huge bag. And then it has a deal that goes into a mask, and I do a bunch of like high intensity exercise underneath it. And it's about 12 to 15 minutes in that. And it actually has some really fascinating health benefits that we're working through, especially with the idea of, So, we're still in the testing phase of that. But for me personally, making sure that I'm working on developing a big aerobic base to build upon. And then what's been pretty fascinating is, because I think I've lifted weights for so long and I've always kept a pretty high amount of muscle mass, I don't nearly have to work as hard as I used to. So for me to maintain what I do, really only like 3-4 days a week. Like I'll do this program 3 days a week, but normally it's really just 2 on, 1 off, 2 on, 1 off. Yeah. And I try to do some form of big squat. There's always going to be a ton of unilateral movements. I've gotten into using some more machines. So we've added some more machines in. Cool. Just because I read some really fascinating research that talked about muscle and hypertrophy being greater and with stability mixed in. So if you can take the stability aspect, now this doesn't do anything for central nervous system efficiency or athleticism, but like pure hypertrophy, if you can use something that takes stability out of the equation, where like, for example, if I have a hammer incline press. Like if I sit in there and all I have to focus on is pushing, because all the research is really fascinating on hypertrophy. Like the number one key factor for hypertrophy is mechanical tension and working towards failure. Right. Like if you can create tension in the muscle and you can work towards failure and do it safely, then you're effectively driving hypertrophy. So that's been a big one for me. I tend to eat pretty well. I tend to weigh and measure, I eat a high protein diet. I don't eat like an asshole is my biggest one. Maybe drink like maybe 1 or 2 drinks a week. I get my blood work done. So I try to figure out where I'm micronutrient deficient. It's a big one. So the food you're eating today is about 1/10 as nutrient dense as it was 100 years ago. Yeah. So we've stripped out the soil. So that's a big one. So being able to go get some micronutrient testing done and then being able to supplement that one. Another one I've been really kind of my head just exploded. I just finished, or actually I'm in the middle of
I can't remember the lady's name. She wrote a book on basically like how plastic is affecting our bodies. She was on Joe Rogan about a year ago. Dr. Shauna Swan, I think is her name.
Okay.
And she's a pretty bitchin' book that you guys should check out. I can't remember. Let me pull up the name of it. But yeah, if you want to link that, cool. She has a book about how like plastic is affecting not only like testosterone levels, sex binding globulin hormone, how it's affecting testosterone, sperm counts and this, it's really fascinating stuff. So that's been a big one for me, like trying to avoid plastic. The other one that's been pretty fascinating is, I'm not like a huge, sauna. I mean, I've always done ice baths. I mean, I did that for majority of my NFL career. So I think that stuff's real interesting. Yeah. In terms of like longevity, I know Kelly Starrett's real big into it. We went to his place and did a bunch of sauna stuff. So nice. I think, anything that gets me outside. So I have a pretty big piece of property here. So we're constantly managing this stuff. And anything that gets me outside and, the other big thing that's a big push for me in terms of eating and performance and health is my wife is in such phenomenal shape. Dude, she's absolutely shredded. Wow. So her conditioning and as much muscle as she carries and the shape that she's in, wakes me up and like busts my ass because she constantly makes me look bad. Yeah. So I think that's pretty good.
Amazing. Appreciate you sharing that, man. What's the best means for people to follow you? Is it Instagram?
Yeah, Instagram at John Welbourn. So if you shoot me an email or a DM or whatever, I usually respond to stuff. You can find me at Power Athlete. I'm just at John Welbourn on all socials. I'm not huge on Twitter because it just feels like noise. But I'm easy to find, man. If you put in Power Athlete John, I'm easy to find. Amazing. All right. Appreciate the time. Much appreciated. Thanks for tuning in this episode of Healthspan Academy, guys. Want to see you next time. Hey, what's up, guys? Thanks for tuning in today. Hope you enjoyed the episode. Thank you so much for supporting this channel. This has been a fun project. We're growing in viewership every single week, and we obviously couldn't do that without you. So thank you for continuing to tune in. I really hope you're getting value out of the programming and the content. Just wanted to give you a heads up. I've been working on a book on health and longevity the last couple of years, been collaborating with my colleague, Dr. Dan Vitale, who's an expert in the field as well. And we've basically just kind of summarized the literature, some of the techniques that we found really useful in the world of biohacking, what our exercise regimen looks like, what's, cardio type stuff is going to help us live longer and healthier, mobility work, nutrition. We've covered the whole spectrum, everything that you can basically be in control of in your health and fitness kind of moving forward to help you live as healthily as possible for as long as possible. And it's available free for download. So if you click on the YouTube banner, you'll see a link to download the blueprint. It's also on our Instagram profile or on the website. You can click on 5pillarmethod.com/optimize to get your free copy of the book. And I hope you enjoy it. Hope you're keeping well. Thanks again for tuning in, and we'll see you next time.